So one of my mantras in recent years has been that climate chaos is a great friend to the poor, not an enemy. You know, received opinion has it that climate chaos is bad news for the poor. Oh, they're terribly off. Oh, it's going to be worse than usual. No, not at all. Of course, the mystics have long understood that climate chaos can be described as the more than human force of righteousness and mercy entering history, in a sense, putting paid to the shop-worn ways of thinking and the institutions that are based essentially on a perception of reality that's fundamentally not only defunct, wrong, and on a fast track to a charnel house, but without any fundamental ability to respond coherently to the changes ahead. Meanwhile, the poor are quite well placed to do that. Let me show you in practical, down-to-earth terms what I mean. Here, for example, we've got our field crops. That's the crops outside in the field as distinct from the greenhouse at the Calaveras County Poor People's Campaign Farm. I just picked up a huge piece of plastic, a donation from a friend a few days ago, that's allowed me to put 4 more cloches, 4 more protective covers over the beds that we had covered before. Some of you might have seen the video that I did in the aftermath of the last major storm we had that came in, which flattened most of the crops that were that were exposed. Now, with some judicious, tender loving care and the grace of God, they've bounced back and they're doing quite well now. The ones that were undercover at the time barely even blinked. But what I've been able to do the last few days after this plastic has come in has basically been massively increase the amount of crops that we have undercover. Now, what I want to show you is how funky this scene looks. I've got this plastic weighed down with benches, pieces of steel, rocks, railroad ties, wooden posts. It all looks pretty ghetto, doesn't it? Well, it is pretty ghetto. It's really funky, in fact. And one of the reasons I think it's important for you to see just what ghetto means is that ghetto is an approach, for example, that allowed me to get a greenhouse full of winter greens through a -10 degree weather event in the Pacific Northwest some years ago. That's 42 degrees below freezing. Now, the conventional farms in that part of the world basically went down, they crashed. The greenhouses, the crops that weren't destroyed by collapsing greenhouses froze to death. But by taking a funky, ghetto, low-level, grassroots approach, essentially what you find is that the poor, for the most part, are very well placed to handle the challenges ahead, where these traditional, conventional institutions and approaches and the economies of scale and the general corporateness of everything is actually not so well placed to deal with the great planetary changes that are coming our way. We have very well placed, educated health professionals locally who are going gaga for the health benefits of the produce that are coming out of our fields and our greenhouses just now. It's a classic example of how, when we step into a truly coherent relationship with the real, not some simulacrum based on people commanding us to be fooled by appearances, but when we really get to grips with the real at the rootsy, most grounded level, We step into our power, really. Poor People's Campaign.